Robbyn Abbitt is the GIS coordinator for Miami University, where she has been since 2005 developing and teaching GIS courses, advising undergrads and grad students, and serving as Associate Director of Miami's Geospatial Analysis Center, and also manages the Geographic Information Science Certificate programs. Robbyn has a BS in Environmental Science and Public Administration from Indiana University, as well as an MS in Environmental Science from the University of Idaho. She's worked in GIS for more than 20 years and is focused on natural resource management, food accessibility, and resource use and allocation. With all her years and varied experience, Robbyn is going to talk with us today about finding our way as GIS professionals. So Robbyn, are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready to go. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be in a kind of a space with everyone again. So I'll say this is a nice kind of order to my day. I spent the morning talking to students at Chicago State University who are still in the classroom talking about what is this GIS thing? Does it really exist in the job market? What should you do to make yourself the most valuable when you leave? And I was able to pop in and hear the second half there of Jessica's talk, and hearing it's always fun to hear somebody else kind of repeat some of the same things, the themes that you talk about as well. So just highlighting even for ourselves, which is stuff that I highlighted for kind of people coming out into the professional world, which is you really are the only you in the room. And if you don't see yourself in the field that you're wanting to go into, go and be that person. Because, you know, Jessica is younger than I am, so I would have entered the professional world prior to her at the end of the 90s. And I was one of the only, I had no idea I was going to walk into it, but I was one of the only women in the room for years. And I've seen that totally flip on its head, but you could probably look across all the names in this group right now and see that that's not the case anymore. And that's a relatively short amount of time for that to change. But if I had looked at the field and said, you know, this doesn't seem to be the place that people like me are at, let's go do what I find next interesting, then I would have just been one less person, right? So that critical mass builds over time as you take that step to get out there. So that's just fun that I just gave that same little spiel to a bunch of people who are about to be our colleagues when they graduate. So, but today, this is my talk for you guys today is a little bit more focused on those of us a little bit more seasoned. We've been out there for a little while. And it's kind of a little revamp of the talk that I gave at Ohio GIS conference this year. So I do apologize if you saw me there. You're going to see a lot of overlap, but maybe the story was interesting enough for you the first time that maybe you'll look for some little nuggets of difference here the second time. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to turn off my camera to save some bandwidth, and I'm going to share my screen, get this thing all going here. Oh, okay, first of all, I don't work with Microsoft Teams very often, so I have to share my screen. So you're going to see you guys here for just a second. And then I'm going to share my screen. All right, so if someone could give me an audible that you're seeing the full screen slide.
We're good.
Excellent. Okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about, as a professional, how do we find our way and how do we make our mark, and what is that anyway? What is the way and what is the mark that you're going to leave? So that's really basically what we're going to focus on here. So really, since it's GIS Day, yay GIS, I figured since we're kind of at that 50-year mark, it would be kind of fun to look at a brief history of GIS, 50 years in the making. And it's kind of nice that Esri gives you a screenshot of exactly what that is over the past 50 years. It takes us up basically to 1981, which, for some context, you know, we see the early history there in the 60s, moving on to the GIS. In the early 80s, I mean, computers weren't in homes. I was only 7 years old in the second grade, had no idea really what a computer even was. Chances are you were a lot younger or not even here yet. So this is not our time, right? This is our history as professionals. This isn't the space that we were living in. So if we kind of fast forward a little bit, this is a question that I asked at a conference in 2017. It was, did you take any GIS classes prior to entering the workforce? You can easily see that the majority of the attendees of that session actually they had taken GIS classes, which I was actually surprised by this. I wasn't expecting the majority of the people to say yes And honestly, what this tells me is that the majority of the people on my session were most likely younger than me, because I bet if I'd asked this question 20, even 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the graph would look more like this, right? So we didn't take the classes, not because we chose not to, but simply because the classes weren't there. So GIS may be around for 50 or more years, but the presence of it in our mainstream education has not been there. That's a fairly recent development. I actually tried to look to see if I could figure out when the first GIS classes were offered, and I'm sure there's a peer-reviewed paper out there somewhere. I just didn't stumble upon it in my 5 minutes of Googling. But from my own personal experience, I was an undergrad in the 90s, and I never saw a GIS class. What I vaguely remember about this thing called GIS is sitting in a common area, watching grad students wander around with stacks and reams of paper, muttering and be so stressed out, grumbling about this thing called GIS, and I actually had the thoughts of, quote, like, nope, never gonna do it. Whatever that is, I don't want anything to do with it, which only goes to say, you know, be careful what you say, because I would be obviously become a huge part of my personal story and about my finding my own way post-education. So let's talk a little bit about that, about finding your way. It's something we all do every day. How have we kind of functionally done this just as humans over the past 50 years, the past 30, 40, 50 years? Chances are it looked a lot like this. So who remembers these, right? So that's actually a 1960s vintage Rand McNally Road Atlas. So we all use these to get from point A to point B. They were actually resources from experts. We learned how to read them, how to interpret them, and how to use them to navigate our surroundings. We also made sure that our road trip drinks did not spill on them, or we were doomed, or we got in trouble from our parents. I guarantee you that. So that little road atlas in the middle was the one I grew up with in the car, and I know that I destroyed several versions of them by being in the back seat with it. But moving forward, right? So we also, after that, on our desktop computers, more sophisticated tools came out. We were able to map our ways on our desktop with some cool technology. Then suddenly it showed up in our car, right? So we had that resources with us. And even at work, we were starting to get some really cool technology that we could work with at work and see where we wanted to go and to help us move around in our environment. So fast forward to 2020, and now our mobile devices are essential to our everyday lives. Suddenly the tools that we have been using as GIS professionals along the way in the industry are what everyone is using to go from place to place. So these are no longer the tools just of our profession, of our trade. These are the tools of navigating everyday life. They've taken over those paper products, and these have now turned into the actual professional information that people want, with who they're learning from and what they're learning to navigate, to move around. These are just some examples from our students using those mobile technologies. I've had students out at Brookville Lake working for the Army Corps of Engineers, mapping assets using their mobile devices and an external antenna to get some better accuracy. I have students that are mapping cemeteries using those mobile devices. So this is a real convergence of our 2020 get from point A to point B in our personal life technology to also integrating that back into our professional life, which is really interesting. And in the classroom, it's really interesting too, because it used to be that I had to have a whole host of tablets available for people who didn't have smartphones, or for people who had Androids and the tools only ran on iPhones. Now, nearly every student who comes into my class has phones that are well better than mine. And we no longer need those things. So we've even, like, some of our technology in the classroom has become obsolete just by virtue of more people have it. It's become critical to our everyday lives, and it's got an interesting value in our professional lives as well. But lest we think that we're super smart and we're the first that have come up with all of this, we're going to take a quick trip back in time to 1900 with the Baldwin Auto Guide. That was, I quote, "the only device of its kind ever perfected, giving the user specific directions for the desired course with no advertising and a light that can be used to tour at night." So yeah, pretty sophisticated for 1900s. Moving forward to the 1920s, there was actually already a watch that could tell you how to get from point A to point B. You went and you got a scroll, it had your start place, your stop spot, and you could just scroll on your wrist how to get from point A to point B. And then finally, in 1930, there was a dashboard mounted from the company Eider Auto that it was connected actually to your speedometer. So it loaded the map, and the map would automatically scroll as you drove, showing you exactly where you were along your driving route, which is probably something that we've only ever thought of as being recent technology of placing you within the map. We had the ideas back in the 30s, and we were doing it back in the 30s. Somehow that kind of got shadowed and then came back with our current technology. So this only goes to show that we're always trying to find our way. And we've been doing it for centuries. We've been doing it for millennia, but for the past 50 years, GIS has been helping us as professionals do that in our professional careers. So this is just the smallest snapshot of GIS software, and this is very specific to my life. I have kind of been born and bred in the Esri world. It was the first thing I landed on because at the time it was the only thing that was around. Back when the black box was our world, I could have also crowded everything else in here: GRASS, Mapbox, Map Info, Small World, other pay-to-play software, the emerging technologies of open source as well. But really what I just want to show here is that this is for me kind of personally a timeline of my comfort with all things GIS and geospatial. Back in that black box, it was a box. It had limits. You could get comfortable and you could actually kind of almost know everything there was to know in that black box. Moving forward on this timeline to ArcView, ArcMap, and now ArcPro, the GIS world is just exploding. And what you can do with the technology and the data is now no longer limited to that black box, because that box has literally exploded. So these are some graphics. We've all seen these graphics. They have overwhelming connections and endless concepts of what GIS can do and how it can be connected to all things. I show these to my students all the time, really simply to tell them, don't try to decipher the graphic. Just know that the more elements that are on the graphic, that is what's telling you the more you can do and the more integrated systems are becoming. Right? So we don't want to have to try, this isn't going to tell us how to do GIS. This is really just telling us that there's a lot you can do and a lot of things are interconnected. Because right now we're here, where GIS is everywhere. And I would argue that 2020 has shown the outside world, outside of us as GIS professionals, that GIS is everywhere and geospatial is everywhere more than ever, more than any other year or decade since GIS came out. 2020 has made this apparent. So we are all seeing maps in the media. Social media, I mean, we talk about the fire season. My kids even now know the term ArcGIS because of a viral TikTok that talked about the California wildfires, the election, the hurricane season. We see it everywhere. We're in a time where more and more people are seeing the results of our daily work and seeing examples of things that we do. So how do we find, in the midst of all of this, how do we find our way as a GIS professional? So we may have been finding our ways using technology personally, but since now we're seeing this convergence of our work life, GIS spill into our personal life, what does finding our way now really look like? Well, I would come back and I would argue that this question is actually really important, because what this tells me is that a very important part of finding our way is learning. In order to move forward, we have to continue learning, and that is so important in the current situation of GIS and how GIS and emerging technologies are growing. If we stop learning, we become irrelevant very quickly. So the ability to continue learning, the desire to continue learning, and the willingness, even if you don't have the desire to do it, the willingness to do it is what's going to keep you moving forward and relevant. But even with that, and especially with all the amazing things that you'll see today and that you see on social media and all the virtual workshops that I'm sure we'll all attend this year, I also want to remind you guys of this survey question result, which was, do you feel you were prepared for the professional GIS world? Because it may feel like everyone else kind of has it all figured out and that you are alone in wondering if you know enough to be a part of this now very diverse crowd. But I will tell you that what this graphic shows me, and honestly consoles me, is that we are all more together in this kind of and not at all box than in the yes box. And honestly, if you would have asked me 20 years ago where I fell into this box, I probably would have been more inclined to say kind of and yes, because in that black box, I was getting to feel pretty comfortable. I felt like I really knew what I was doing. But with the way things are growing now, I would say I oscillate between not at all and kind of more often than I'm in that yes. It's simply the reality of the field that we're in, is that it's constantly changing, constantly innovating. We don't have the luxury of sitting too long and being comfortable. We're constantly challenged to learn more in order to stay relevant. And since we can't sit, we move. And along the way, we have our own personal and professional landmarks. So I'd like for you just to take a moment and think about your most significant places, your personal landmarks. Where are they? Where were you when they happened? And then think about now, how have all of these landmarks for you been connected? Do they perhaps resemble the efficiency and the directness of a traveling salesman route problem? Very efficient, you knew where you were going and you took the most efficient route. Or do they look more like the wanderings of first graders with GPS units who have just been told that there are Easter eggs out there and they stop listening to everything else and it is mass craziness? I learned from this that you save the Easter egg part for the end of the presentation as opposed to the beginning, but that's okay. I learned from it. And just a shout out to those little first graders down there. They're now sophomores in high school, so it's amazing how time changes. But I would actually argue that between that traveling salesman efficient route and this craziness of these first graders with GPS units, in reality, your path and mine are most likely a combination of both. And what I want to highlight here for you today is that that is perfectly okay. We all are going to have periods of smooth sailing, interrupted by times of getting turned around or circling around a bit. So have you ever had a career change? Have you moved? Have you sat in one place and you knew that you should move, but it just takes a while to work up the courage to do so? Or have you ever been one of those people who just changes direction all of a sudden just because? All of that is great because all of that is yours. That is your journey and you learn so much along the way. But this always comes to bear, what if my path doesn't look like somebody else's? What if it doesn't look as good as someone else's? They got better grades. They knew what they wanted sooner than I did. They just seemed to get it and they got promoted first. Their maps and apps are getting public notice and on and on. That comparison monster can be there for all of us. So what I want to encourage is just to keep in mind everyone's path. Everyone's path is going to have their own twists and turns. We may also be on a similar GIS journey, learning new tools, techniques, data collection methods, but what makes us effective as a group and what makes you valuable as an individual is that we are not carbon copies of each other. Each of our own experiences brings something valuable to the table. And when all of our paths are displayed, we look a bit like a bowl of spaghetti, not unlike our spaghetti data models of old. See, I brought it back to GIS. It wasn't just paths. So honestly, I hope nobody's having flashbacks to lack of topology in the shapefile data model. We won't stay here long. But really just to show you that this mess is not a mess, because this mess is what keeps us all working with our own strengths and working together to a common goal. So along this presentation, I'm just going to have some friendly advice for all of these different stages. So some friendly advice for someone finding their way. Number one, find your people. And I would argue that you're doing that now by attending this GIS Day event. You can continue to do it by becoming involved in your local user group, finding the people at work who share similar interests and desires or a similar field. Get involved in those and find those forums and those ways to build a community, even if you're an office of one. So you may be the only person doing GIS in your office, but that doesn't mean you're isolated, especially not now when we are so connected in the virtual world. Find people that you can leverage. There are people I know on this call and in this presentation, they all know they're part of my people, because when I have questions, they're the group that gets my emails about, hey, I need some of my people to help me figure this problem out, because as an office of one, it can be hard. And then always ask for directions. It is better to ask than to sit and worry and wring your hands, panic, and eventually just ask, but after you've wasted multiple hours. I did this in grad school. My classic example is I was thrown into a GIS lab. I was given no training and told to do something, and I was terrified. And I sat at my desk for 2 hours because I did not know how to tar and gun zip a file. I had no idea what the words even meant. But I sat there for 2 hours and stewed and was miserable. Finally, I got up and asked somebody who'd been working in the lab for a year already. And he was like, oh yeah, he came over, he even wrote down in my notebook, like the code I needed to write down to do it. And you know, with the DOS prompt that I was working at, it took him like 3 minutes. And it didn't bother him that he needed to answer my question. So always ask for directions. It's better than just sitting there. And it's also sometimes better than just guessing. So sometimes getting some direction from someone who might know more is always best. I also want to say that it's okay to cry, to scream, and to laugh. It is okay to let all that out. It's okay to be frustrated. But I would argue that you do need to find some way to relieve that stress and kind of quell that anxiety. So find things, whether it's going outside, fresh air, watching something on TV, scrolling on social media, whatever it is that you do to quell that anxiety, do that. I would just argue maybe not in your cubicle or in your boss's office, but do something to just let it out. You gotta just let it out and then you can move on. And that's gonna allow you to not be afraid to do new things. You really do have to try new things. They're gonna keep you in the conversation. They're gonna keep you relevant for what comes next. This ability to go and try new things is the hallmark of staying relevant within new geospatial technologies. But what if you get lost? And I would argue that at some point in time, we are all going to find ourselves lost. Sometimes things just go sideways. It could be with your data or your applications, right? Who hasn't seen these types of things pop up on their computer? And it's so frustrating, and sometimes it's terrifying, and sometimes it's what it consumes your day, your week, and your month to figure out. And sometimes, no matter what we do, things just don't go the way we plan. Like, let's say, a global pandemic that scuttles all of our plans and makes us all rework and have to figure out how to do the things we already knew how to do. So what does it maybe look like to get lost? Well, it could be a wrong map projection. It could be a wrong analysis setting that sets off a cascade of things down the future that you want to just kind of roll back and grab the past and fix. Bad data types, broken data links, or broken URLs that don't work when they get published to the broader world. It could just be feeling overwhelmed at the technology changes, wondering if you're in the right place at the right time. Oh, the dreaded reply all email. And I would argue that I think I have been in each of these places at some point in time in my professional career. Even that reply all email still makes me cringe. And this is where I wish that we were kind of in a live setting where we could look across the room, because I think we would all feel a lot better as we see other people like sit there and bow their head and shake it and be like, yes, I know, I've been there. We could share amazing stories, maybe in the Mappy Hour. You guys can share the ways that you've gotten lost, but then of course how you found yourself after the fact. And then these are just some things that I like to share because I think they make us feel better. Because I know none of us were the authors of any of these crazy things. This one map is just, it's not like somebody got lost, but I think it's a map that really only us in Ohio think is hilarious, because how far away is Ohio? Well, this is a map that's for Ohioans. Yes, we're right here and everyone else is away. But some other people who had a rough day would be whoever made this map for promoting the Atlanta Falcons going to London in 2014. Because I hope they weren't too concerned when they apparently disembarked their plane in what is apparently Barcelona instead of London. So the cartographer needs to circle back to that one. This one from Whole Foods just hurts my head, because I don't know who decided that land should be blue and water should be some textured color there. My brain is hurting even at that. But what's even more disturbing, and the problem with this map, is the fact that Spain has somehow detached from France, moved around, reattached in puzzle formation, such that now we can walk from Spain to Algeria. So need to go back and kind of double check on that map, because that's all kinds of wrong there. And then we land on this one, which I just chuckle at, and I kind of want to go give the person who made it a hug, because there's so much wrong. You just shake your head and you move on. And then, since it's 2020 and murder hornets are apparently a thing now, this was a CNN news story about giant hornets killing 42 people in China, which is terrifying and horrible in itself. But even more terrifying is that 2020 has been worse than I anticipated, because suddenly Hong Kong is no longer in China, it is in Brazil. So even more has happened on the global scale, and I'm just simply confused. So while we may not be that lost, here is some friendly advice that I have for if you do find yourself lost. It involves the exact same things about finding your way, finding your people, asking for directions. It's okay to freak out and then come back around. Don't be afraid to try new things. And then also, I would say, be willing to say thank you to those people who have helped you, or I'm sorry when you screw up. So one of the biggest things that I tell my students is don't try to fake that you know something. I know that it's out there, fake it till you make it, but really when it comes to job interviews or saying what work you can do, just like Jessica mentioned previously, if she can't do something, she's honest about that and she provides somebody who could. That's exactly what this is saying. This is saying, say thank you to the people who help you, and then if you are the one who screws up or you can't do something, admit that. Because that's going to help you and that's going to circle back around and just it's going to make your life even better by admitting that, as opposed to stewing in the place where you end up in a place that you cannot get out of, right? You dig a hole so deep that you can't get out of. So eventually you're going to find your way again. You're going to get back moving forward and closer to making your mark. So what does making your mark even look like? I would argue you'll see excellent examples throughout today, throughout all the presentations today, and throughout probably a lot of the presentations and workshops that you'll go to throughout the next year. Over the years, I've seen amazing things come just from our local GIS community. So there's been regional, state, and national awards, amazing dashboards, especially some of the dashboards that have come out recently with the pandemic, amazing apps, wonderful collaboration and connection between groups of people doing some fantastic and amazing volunteering with disaster response and community mapping, just doing some things that are so valuable that you just look at them and you're like, wow, that is just amazing that you're able to do that. And we all agree that those things are all so worthy of being highlighted, but I would argue that making your mark isn't always highlighted in public or on a big screen or lots of little screens around your area. Sometimes, and I would argue more often than not, it's the local customer or citizen who reaches out with a request that you can meet, a need that you can meet, the coworker that you just simply listen to, the grace you give when someone else screws up because you have either received that grace in the past or you hope someone will give it to you in the future, the willingness, as we all have most often, to do even more with less, and sometimes it's just simply showing up each day and doing your job. And that is your mark, and that is phenomenal, and that is the underpinning of what moves us forward. So do not disvalue the fact of what you're doing every day because it doesn't come out with flashing lights. Most of the most valuable things in life that build up to other valuable things are these day-to-day activities that we say we're going to do, even if someone isn't patting us on the back and saying thank you all the time. So this year, obviously for all of us and for me as well, has meant a lot of learning new things, figuring out how to do life differently. I have spent the year trying to transition all of my Esri-based stuff all over to Arc Pro. And one of the things that I've done where I kind of married together our kind of pandemic family life with that is that we were one of those families that started kayaking during all of this. And I started taking pictures of where we were kayaking, marking them on a map. And this is actually how I taught myself how to create layouts in Arc Pro. I was so mad that I had to relearn how to do part of my job, but I just decided, you know what, I'm going to make something for me and for fun, and it helped me learn new skills. So if you're bogged down, sometimes finding a way to work with data that you like or make up data that you want to use is a way to learn new things. And then also, I will say that my most proud map of the entire year is this one. So I have always wanted a raised bed garden closer up to our house so I didn't have to walk out to the big garden that's out by our barn. But I never had time to build it, to plan it, to take care of it. And 2020 and quarantine actually gave me that. It gave me time to plan and to create. And this garden actually made a mark on all of my days, all summer long. We're still even enjoying some of the stuff that came out of that tiny little garden. And I would just say that sometimes it's the little things that do become the big things and help to make a mark on your life, professionally and personally. So what's some friendly advice for making your mark? Well, it's all those other things I said before, paired with trusting yourself more than you are inclined. You know things. You know things that everyone else doesn't because you are the only, as Jessica said, you are the only you in the room. So trust yourself more than you are inclined. And then finally, I'm going to end this on saying the most important thing that I see now is the ability to reach back. And don't just help people to where you are, be willing to launch them even further and get rid of the idea of bringing people to you or launching them in front of you takes something away from you, because it doesn't. You will stay where you are and you will continue on your own trajectory, what you work for. But if you can reach back and pull people up to you and fling them forward, it helps them, but then it just builds your own community. You then just have a wider community of people that are in your kind of sandbox to help you move forward as well. And I would argue that this goes for the person who is the CEO of a company all the way down to the intern that was just hired. Now, the intern might think there's nobody below me. Oh, yes, there is. There's the person who wants to be the intern next, right? So tell somebody else about the internship you're in. Talk that person up. Pass out their resume. Be willing to send people ahead of you, and don't buy into the lie that it will take something away from you. So that's my biggest last piece of advice. And then I'm going to end here on one of my favorite slides that I show at the end of my presentations this year, just because if I bored you, if you disagreed with me, if you didn't like what you heard, I've found that we all can agree that we like baby goats. And these are our babies from actually this past January. We're about to have another set of babies in this coming January, but these were when they were super tiny and they were jumping off of my youngest in the barn, and they always make me laugh. So I always find it's fun to end on baby goats.
Well, Robbyn, right. You your presentations without baby goats, so thank you so much.
Yeah, baby goats are always a requirement. I think every time I give one now, people are asking about goats. So.
And Andrew Wilson says put some GPS trackers on their goats when they're outside, and then we can see what kind of spaghetti they make.
Oh, good Lord, yeah.
So we have lots of thanks. I myself want to extend quite a bit of thanks for that presentation. That was wonderful. I think it's something that all people coming out of school into a career in GIS should be required to look at. It's something that I've given a lot of advice about myself, that when you're in school, specifically grad school, your adrenaline is maxed out all the time. You are constantly being barraged with new information. You're producing constantly. And then to go into the workforce, things may slow down or they may continue with that frenetic pace. But it is a bit of and I apologize for all of the noises. Andy had already told me y'all can hear whenever anybody chats on my computer. But how important it is to recognize that timing changes when you're coming out of school, and that just because you may not be on that same skyrocketing constant all the way up pace doesn't mean that you're stagnating. It just means that things happen on a much more condensed time scale in school than they do in the real world. So Robbyn, this was a wonderful presentation. Ann Kisela says best pep talk I've heard in a while. Thank you from another office of one. This is great. Megan says thank you. This is wonderful. I'm really glad that we have this recorded so that we can put this on the SWOGIS website, and I would highly recommend that you promote this on LinkedIn, and once we get you that link, we'll send it to you, and please send people to that, because this was fantastic, Robbyn.
No, this is nothing special. Like, this is just kind of what I've gleaned over 20 years of doing it, and I'm in a unique position in education to be that I talk to students who are about to go on to their next adventures all the time. So I'm well versed in kind of how do you kind of get someone prepared mentally and educationally for going on to that next one. So it's interesting. I loved having it circle back and making it relevant for us as well, because they're going to be our colleagues, and we're the example that they're looking at. So thank you very much for asking me. You all know that I enjoy talking to people, so I'm always happy to talk to my people when I can.
The only issue I take with that is this is something special. This isn't nothing. This is something that a lot of people need to see and hear. So don't talk yourself down.
There we go. I'll take my own advice.
Okay. Do we have any other questions beyond all of the baby goats?
I can answer goat questions too if you have goat questions. We recently acquired 2 donkeys as well. So if you're buying pandemic pets, apparently donkeys are pandemic pets too. So we have 2 20-year-old male donkeys that live up to the not so nice name of their species. They are, they're humorous though. Hear donkeys in the background. Yeah, that's an interesting noise.
Right.
Yeah, the goats do stay out of the garden. Yeah.
Lots of stuff about the donkeys, but Robbyn, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. And I'm not sad I didn't go to Ohio GIS because I get to see it here.
There you go. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you again for having me. It's a pleasure, and it's fun to see everybody.